On the night of April 2, 2026, a U.S. Air Force F-15E Strike Eagle lifted off from a base somewhere in the Middle East. The crew had done this dozens of times before. A combat mission over Iran. Dangerous, yes, but routine. They never made it back. Within minutes of being shot down, the most powerful military on Earth launched one of the most daring rescue operations since the fall of Saigon. Hundreds of special operators, CIA officers inside enemy territory, Delta Force scaling a 7,000-foot mountain ridge in the dark. This is the full story of how America pulled its colonel out of the mountains of Iran and nearly lost everything trying. The F-15E Strike Eagle is one of the most advanced combat aircraft ever built. Dual engines, supersonic speed, the ability to fight at night in any weather at low altitude. It was designed to go places other jets can't and survive. But on the night of April 2nd over Isfahan province in central Iran, something went wrong. The jet was flying low. That's standard practice in a contested environment. Stay beneath the radar, reduce your exposure window. But flying low has a cost. It puts you in range of a weapon the U.S. military has always feared more than any missile battery: a MANPADS. A man-portable air defense system. A missile you can carry on your shoulder. Point. Fire. Gone. No radar signature, no warning. Just a heat-seeking warhead coming up from the ground at over 1,000 miles per hour. Iranian forces fired. The F-15E was hit. Both crew members ejected, separately in the darkness, over hostile territory. The pilot was located within hours. But the second man, a full colonel, the weapons systems officer sitting in the rear seat, had disappeared into the mountains of Iran. And Iran already knew he was out there. Here's what made this situation different from any other downed pilot rescue. This wasn't a young lieutenant on his first deployment. This was a colonel, a weapons systems officer with decades of experience. A man who knew the classified targeting packages for the Iran campaign. Who knew which routes U.S. aircraft were flying, which electronic systems were being used, which Iranian air defenses had already been degraded, and which ones hadn't. If Iran captured him alive, it wouldn't just be a propaganda victory. It would be an intelligence catastrophe. Iran's Revolutionary Guard moved fast. They put out a reward for anyone who could locate the missing American. Tribesmen in the mountains were already shooting at U.S. search helicopters. State media declared the pilot was being hunted. And then, Washington went quiet. No Pentagon briefings, no State Department statements. The White House said almost nothing. Trump, who posts about everything every hour, went silent. Every analyst watching this knew exactly what that silence meant. An operation was already underway, and they couldn't afford to say a single word. Within hours of the shoot-down, U.S. Central Command had mobilized one of the largest special operations packages since the raid on Osama bin Laden. Delta Force operators, Navy SEAL Team 6, Air Force Special Tactics Airmen, the ground troops who mark landing zones in hostile territory and call in air support under fire. CIA officers who had been working inside Iran for weeks, all of them converging on a single point, a mountain ridge in central Iran, in the dark. Meanwhile, the colonel was doing exactly what his training had prepared him for. Every U.S. military pilot goes through SERE school. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. It's one of the hardest training pipelines in the American military. They teach you how to live in the wilderness, how to evade capture, how to resist interrogation, and most importantly, how to stay alive long enough to be found. The colonel had sprained his ankle during the ejection. He was alone, at altitude, in a country that wanted him dead or captured. He found a crevice on a hilltop, and he hid. Then he did the one thing that could bring his people to him. He established radio contact with U.S. forces and authenticated his identity. A critical step. Proof that U.S. commandos weren't walking into a trap. The CIA had already begun laying the groundwork. A deception campaign, planting false intelligence inside Iran that U.S. forces had already located the colonel and were moving him in a different direction. Meanwhile, U.S. aircraft were jamming Iranian communications across a wide area. Roads around the colonel's position were bombed to prevent tribesmen from closing in. The commandos moved, undetected, into Iran. In the dark, they scaled the ridge, reached his position, and then the operation nearly fell apart. Two MC-130 aircraft, large, capable Air Force Special Operations transports, had landed on a temporary makeshift airstrip built inside Iranian territory to support the rescue. And then both planes suffered mechanical failure. At the same time, in hostile territory, with approximately 100 Special Operations forces now stranded on the ground in Iran. The decision that followed was made in seconds. U.S. forces destroyed both MC-130s on the runway. Two MH-6 Little Bird helicopters were destroyed alongside them. Classified equipment aboard was demolished. They would not leave a single piece of American technology for Iran to exploit. And then they called for the smallest aircraft that could do the job. Turboprop planes, capable of landing on short, improvised strips. And they waited in the dark in the mountains of Iran, hoping nothing else went wrong. Before dawn, the smaller aircraft landed. U.S. commandos loaded the colonel aboard, injured, exhausted, alive. The planes lifted off from Iranian soil and disappeared into the darkness. Hours later, Trump broke his silence. In a post on Truth Social at 2 a.m, he wrote that a brave American warrior had been behind enemy lines in the treacherous mountains of Iran, hunted by the enemy, and that U.S. Special Operations forces had brought him home. Israeli forces had paused their own airstrikes in the region for 2 days, deliberately, to avoid interfering with the rescue. Israeli intelligence had shared targeting data that helped U.S. forces narrow down the colonel's position. Iran disputed the American account. Iranian officials claimed the search was still ongoing. They released photos of wreckage, the destroyed MC-130s and helicopters. Proof, they said, that the operation had failed. It hadn't. The colonel was safe. And the destroyed aircraft told a different story, not of failure, but of discipline. U.S. forces had demolished their own equipment rather than surrender it. That's not what a failed mission looks like. That's what a professional military does. But here is what this operation revealed that Iran and the world should not forget. American planes are flying low over Iran, low enough to be hit by a man with a shoulder-fired missile, a weapon that costs a few $1,000s. Iran has mountains. Iran has tribesmen. And Iran, despite 6 weeks of bombardment, is still fighting back. The colonel is home. The war is not over. Trump's deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz has now passed. He called it Power Plant Day, Bridge Day. Whatever comes next, it will not be quiet. If you want to see what happens when that deadline expires, subscribe. Because the next chapter is already beginning.